Hello and welcome. This is the podcast Gameable Audio, and yet another time we're having a composer with us today. And I want everybody to be introduced to Joel Bille. Hello.
Hello.
How are you feeling and doing today, my friend?
I am good. I am a bit sleep deprived from my 1-year-old baby, or child, maybe toddler, maybe even these days. But that's life these days, and I'm fine. Bit
That's
tired.
awesome to hear. So this is going to be a very special episode because this is actually one of the times where a composer comes to me asking to want to talk about a soundtrack. And of course, we've been talking about Fia before when I had the podcast in Swedish, which is kind of, it comes with similarities. And we will notice this over the time of this podcast episode as well. But it was so fun when you actually got to me. It's like, hey, Chris, I want to talk about Wavetale. And I was just super excited when you did that.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Because no other composer has done that so far. And I hope more composers will listen to this episode and hear how excited I am for this and also do this, no matter if they are a composer for a video game or just tracker music and so on, anything that is kind of related to video game music. Yeah. So it's going to be just super interesting to talk and do a deep dive in Wavetale, which is also a game I recently just have played through fully as well.
Nice. I'm excited to hear how you experienced it.
Yes, there is, for people that are interested as well, there is a small mini review on my Instagram, but I think it's way better for people to listen to both the music, hear you talk about the music and how it was kind of incorporated together with experience of Wavetale in this episode. So I think it's way better to listen to this episode rather than reading my mini review of the game. Since people might not know that much about you, maybe they've seen this composer interview that the Thunderful Games has done on you, considering Wavetale. I think it's better for us to get to know you a little bit better from the depth and kind of where it started. So I'm way interested in knowing, when did you actually start the composing part of your life?
Yeah, well, in a way, I think I started composing, composing is a strong word. It was more like a place, probably in early years as a small child. We had a piano at home, and it was just a thing I did was to sit by the piano and play, and that was like what music was like for me. Was just sitting at the piano, hitting random keys, and sometimes I accidentally played something that sounded nice, and I tried to play that again. And that's still how I do it.
And did any of your, how come you had a piano at home? Was any of your parents, did they know piano?
My mom played a bit of piano. My dad is deeply unmusical. He barely knows what's up and down on a guitar. He's actually one of very few actual tone deaf people I know. He's got lots of strong sides, but musicality is not one of them. My mom played the piano a little bit and sang in choirs and stuff, but nothing professionally at all. Just on a hobby level. But what it came very natural to me is just play on the piano, and that kept. Sorry, yeah.
You kind of did enjoy that. Did you go and take classes afterwards, or are you more self-taught due to the fact that you actually had a piano at home?
Yeah, I'm much more self-taught. I did take some lessons, but I came to a sort of level where, because they had me reading sheet music, and I sort of faked that. I just played by ear and staring at the sheets, don't understanding anything. But it came to a level where that didn't work anymore, and that's when I stopped taking lessons, I think. And just kept playing on my own, sort of, and that's been sort of the track. I have a bachelor's in music now, but it's in a program that's called individual performances, and it's very free, and it's pretty much a platform to do what you like and have teachers and peer students feedbacking and talking and developing. So it's more of a free art sort of education, but within music, sort of. So it's been that's been like a pretty solid thread throughout my musical life, like self-taughtness and not really relating to any specific genre. It's been more of a like free exploration kind of thing, I suppose.
I always, when I kind of listen to your music or what I know from your composition and so on, it kind of gives me more like the the spiritual feeling when I'm listening to it. It kind of feels very free form. And I think I kind of like what you're saying at the moment, because it as you said, it's kind of more like what you like to do and what you, I would say, love to do, because you're actually working with it, and you're doing this on your free time as well, working with different projects, etc.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about that yourself? Like when you feel like you can freely explore something rather than finding like a niche and it's like, hey, this is my thing.
Yeah, I'm very glad to hear that you say that. It's because it's it really resonates with me, this sort of free and sort of it's always hard to put in words, which is probably why I do music instead. But to have this sort of I don't know, it's something. It has to come from some sort of place of truth, I suppose. I'm not sure what that means, but and by that, it's also hard to stick like too hard to a genre, because then you're restricted to follow a couple like specific rules. And I don't know, it's always just felt to me that it feels a bit constructed or like artificial somehow. I think it's very natural for me to just. I mean, I do have references. I listen to a lot of music, but it's often a very, very broad spectrum of music. Like I have like a Spotify playlist for reference music for Wavetale, and it's like 9 hours long or something.
Oh, damn!
And there's a lot of pretty far, and I think that's when it becomes interesting, when you take like two really, really contrasting, or like 50 songs or whatever it is, but like ranging from very, very different places, and sort of use that as a method of sort of framing something. Like if you put all of these 50 songs in a circle, in the middle of those, that's where Wavetale is. But it's not really like anything of that either. It's I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but because sometimes when you work, you can get like a game studio can give you like one reference song. We want it to sound like this, but I usually try to avoid that. But because I can only make a slightly like worse version of that song, because that song probably had a much broader base of reference in itself. So.
But I kind of like that what you said. You said like it's harder kind of to have the constraints. You like more free form. So to me, it's kind of interesting that you chose to become a musician for games specifically, because it kind of feels like you need to frame yourself and constrain yourself to some extent. But in your sense, you also have been working on more of those kind of story-driven, narrative-driven type of games. Do you feel like you still have the same kind of constraint working in these type of genre of games?
Yeah, I think I've been drawn to these games for that reason too. I have like declined a couple of offers for games where I just didn't feel that I was like able to do it
To deliver.
To deliver, and that has it's not happened a lot of times, but it's often those times it's been projects that have more of a technical base, or it's more, I don't know, action focused or whatever, and that's just, I don't know how to do that. I like my sort of method is very much going into the core of like, what are we trying to say, what is like the core emotions or values or ideas, and through that come up with music. So if the core is like you shoot robots in space or whatever, I don't know what to do with that.
It's like what is sci-fi?
Yeah, sort of. So I'm not like that sort of what do you call it, like a gun for hire composer that can do anything, because I'm good at doing some specific things, and I try to stick to those kind of.
So you kind of want to be in that niche box when it comes to games, at least. Then.
Yeah, I mean, it can be pretty like broad when it comes to like type of expression, as in like genre or sounds. But it's I enjoy it most when there is some sort of core to it, some sort of like emotional or spiritual or whatever you want to call it, core that I can connect to in some way.
It's going to be interesting to hear what you say when we talk more specifically about the tracks we're going to listen to today. And I think it's time for us to start talking a little bit more specifically about Wavetale here. So for people that don't really know much about Wavetale, Wavetale is a story-driven, kind of semi-linear open world type of game. It's kind of hard to define in that sense because it's so driven about the story, but still every area you open up, you are able to visit these areas again to collect different things and so on. But in this game, this is a third person type of game. You play the character Sigrid, who is a spark caster, basically collecting sparks, which is the energy resource of this world. I kind of would say this is kind of a dystopian kind of Earth kind of way, where the world has been overrun by water, basically, and this is due to a catastrophe that happened in the past that you in this game kind of go around and get to know more about. So it's super interesting in that way and comes a little bit with mystery. So that is kind of where it starts, and now where we're starting this game, we are going to listen to Enter the Night Orchid, which is also one of the first tracks, well, excluding any music from the theme or the main menu, but this is one of the first themes you will listen to when you start the game. And there we fade out, Enter the Night Orchid. And this is also the first kind of area you will kind of explore in. If you play the playable, it's kind of good to say that you have a playable demo if you want to try this game out and listen a little bit to the music as well. So this is the first area that you will play the demo in, and also the start of the game. And this is basically made up of, I don't remember the grandma's name now. And I didn't write that down, but Sigrid's and her grandmother, they own this light tower that kind of pushes away the fog, a fog that kind of spreads gloom around the world. And this is kind of the first song you listen to. It's kind of mellow, it's easy to listen to, and it kind of comes into like how I would interpret like when you're sitting on a rock and just having the wind slowly breeze your cheeks and your face. So my question here, when it comes to this one, when talking about the first area and the first experience you have with the game, How come you selected such a mellow type of track?
Yeah, there was a lot of work with this track actually, and it was the idea was to evoke a feeling of both like the safety of being at home, sort of, because this island is where Sigrid has grown up and lived her entire life so far, and it's a very small island. so it's both like a home and the idea of total safety, sort of, but it's also a bit boring and you sort of want to leave and explore the world. So I had to try to find something that could relate to both these ideas. And the soundtrack version of the song is a combination of two different tracks, actually, because in the game there's a lot of like adaptive stuff going on in the game.
Because you're using Elias, right?
Yeah, we did. That's correct. For everything but the Switch version of the game, we had some technical issues there, so we had to go with a more traditional sort of version. So on the Switch, it's actually a bit different how it plays back. But in general, like when you're on the island, it's this really, really mellow and slow, which is the first half of the soundtrack version of the song. And as you leave the island and start surfing around the waves, the second part comes out with a bit more drive and rhythm stuff going on and more movement. So, but the idea was still to have that sort of a combination of being safe at home, but also with this urge to leave and to explore what lies beyond.
Because you're kind of locked into this first area. I have a couple of things lying around that you will explore. You will have like quests to go and fetch some sparks, basically. And you will have this track going on as you travel back and forth to this. So it kind of felt like you're saying, like, this play. It's still kind of meh, and but you still kind of have the sense of, I don't know if there's a piano in the background going but it kind of gives like the sense of a start of an adventure to me, and I don't really know why.
That's interesting. I don't either. I just poke around until it feels right, but yeah, that's really what the idea sort of was, to have this, because it's also this is the last part of the more drivey movement-ish part of the song is what also plays when you first get to surf, when Sigrid gets her surfing ability, and so it's also sort of the freedom of that movement, but still within this sort of mellow thing. And that was also a clear direction from Sonic Games or Thunderfall, that it should always have like a big chunk of melancholy in everything. Always.
Okay. And that could be a part of the fog then, kind of, I guess. Melancholy together with gloom and so on.
Yeah. It's a lot of that, yeah. It's a bright and colorful world, but it's also always with this melancholic tone.
Yeah. It's quite a contrast, I must say, but because, as you said, it kind of feels colorful, almost like The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker there in colorfulness.
Yeah, sure.
But it also has this darkness around it as well. So it's an interesting contrast, not to say the least.
Yeah.
But also in this project, you had a kind of interesting way to work with not work with the music per se. I'm talking specifically about this little sheet you had while you were working, how the world was kind of built up together with the music. And I want to hear a little bit about this. Can you explain a little bit why you kind of took this approach? Was it a new approach as well that you haven't been working with before?
Yeah, it's been actually a sort of composing method that I developed over the past years. Or method is like sort of approach, maybe more than a method, but it's I spent a lot of time in the early parts of the project to sort of explore these like ideas, what's behind everything, and talking to the narrative team and to art direction to figure out these things, like on non-musical levels, on a more general levels, try to understand what it's about. And in that I've been doing also a lot of like non-musical work. I've like been painting and writing short stories and also this map that's shown on that video that you mentioned earlier. That was also sort of because I'm a bit of like an overview junkie, and it's a pretty. I mean, the experience of the game is pretty straightforward. As you say, this has like a semi-linear stuff, but it's a lot of audio cues, and you also, because you get back to areas, and when you get back the second time, the music is different from the first. So it was like a mess to understand like the scope and what am I actually like what tracks do we need and when should this play and this. So that map was very useful. So it is sort of like a map of the world, and there's arrows everywhere and lots of like comments on references and ideas. And
you kind of use color palettes, like a level designer used coloration in order to say like, oh, this is green, so it's grass and so on. But initially looking at it, kind of looks like a mind map. You started with the main island, you have lines drawn back and forth, you have colors for feedback and so on. It felt like a really good, like worked out method to kind of work with as well. It felt very helpful just looking at it. I was like, I can understand.
Yeah, that's nice.
Because thinking about it, it's like, hey, we're making an open world kind of game where you can go back and forth all you want, and you don't know ever where the player will be. And it's like, oh, you need music to this. Usually people would be like, okay, this is region and this has this music, but no, you have music like transitioning back and forth in between, and it's so interesting sound-wise to this experience.
So that was one of the difficult parts, and also like in early development, the idea was for the game to be more of an open world sort of game, I think. And then it started to narrow down, and for various reasons decided to be more of a linear experience. But so a lot of the composing and a lot of the early work was sort of working in that direction, which it makes sense in the final project as well. But it's a lot to like wrap your head around that kind of game development, because it's so much. Okay, but you could also go backwards over here. What would that sound like? And what would the music have to do in that case? So there's like thousands of these fringe cases that has to be somehow handled.
But considering a game just like Wavetale, it's like you felt like, hey, I can do this. It's narrative driven. It feels like my type of game, I guess. When you I guess you saw either some of the gameplay or you saw a concept of the game before you said, yes, I will work on the music for this game. So considering this, did you have an idea from the start, like, hey, I kind of want to see if I can do the music like this, or how was the process from the start here?
Interesting question. There was like a prototype a lot earlier than like before the actual main production started. There was maybe a year or two before the production actually started. There was a concept. So I sort of had an idea. That was about this sort of vastness of the ocean and this melancholic thing. I've listened to a lot of there's an extremely specific genre of Norwegian mountain jazz-ish, Norsk fjälljazz in Swedish. I'm not sure if it's an actual name, but it's a very interesting type of music. Also, all very like nature-driven. It sort of sounds like, I don't know what the nature in these mountains would sort of sound like, but jazz. Very organic and very, very like fluid. That's what one of the main inspirations genre-wise. But then the Wavetale soundtrack doesn't sound like that, but that was one of the main. And I know I wanted to work with the flugelhorn, an instrument. It's pretty much like a trumpet, but a bit more airy.
No, it sounds really good, and it sounds pretty unique that you utilize the flugelhorn as well. I really enjoyed when you talked about it in the video. I was like, "What?" It was my first initial reaction to it. To me, always when it comes to brass instruments like trumpets, bass, and so on, it always feels like it's a really hard instrument to record. But like, how hard easy is it to actually record these kind of things for a video game or music?
Oh yeah, I mean, it depends. Because I wanted a very specific sound for this record. It's very, very airy. It should almost not sound like an instrument. It shouldn't sound too breathy. It should sound like more like a sort of natural cow's horn or something. It's very airy, lots of windy sounds. And to be honest, I used to put a very, very expensive mic in front of it, and it sounded great.
That is awesome. It's
Yes.
awesome when that kind of works out in that sense, in that way.
Borrowed from our mutual friend Oscar Delius, actually.
Yes.
But it can be tricky to get all of those like airy details, and there's a lot of post-production actually to it to lift that kind of stuff, lift those like organic little clicks and this short and small sort of like normally unwanted sounds, but that makes it feel human or organic.
Exactly. But considering also, if we talk specifically about this track, the Enter the Night Orchid, you said it was kind of a more of a complex song. What was the biggest issue or the hardest complex thing about this song that was kind of hard to get?
I think it was to capture that sort of feeling of both this cozy, homey, safe feeling with in the same track also have this beginning of an adventure. Because we know we had that system with Elias that we could do like different tracks and layered stuff. So we wanted like the island to have something and the surrounding area to have like another version of the same song. It's always tempo synced and everything. So it just that more instruments starts to play as you leave the island and surf around.
Yeah.
And it's also different depending on like if you return to the island from the outside, it needs to work with that feeling of coming home, but it's also the song of leaving. So it was a lot of different sort of emotions too. And it's also sort of the main theme of the game, and that the melody is featured in a couple of other songs as well.
Okay, so it is a returning theme.
Yeah,
was this to capture the more homey feeling, like when, for example, if you get to other islands and so on, or what was the sense to incorporate the tune in other tracks?
Well, to be honest, that melody was originally thought of as the mother's theme, which is also the last song of the soundtrack, Iris theme, with the lyrics and vocals, which is a short lullaby that Sigrid's mom used to sing to her.
Yes.
So that melody probably came first.
I see. Okay.
And then I think I'm not sure if we then realize like, whoa, this could work really well in the orchard. Or how it's been some time now actually since we did this, but so that was the melody is, in my mind, it's called Irish theme. So it's like sort of this safety theme, the mother's theme, the theme of like the connection between a mother and her child. That was sort of the.
Because if I remember correctly, you might correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is also a tune at one point that Sigrid is singing as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because I mid game when you get to this part when Sigrid is singing a little bit, I was like, okay, this was nice, and then by the end of the game, I was like, why do I remember this?
Oh yeah. That's neatly done. Yeah.
So it was quite nice. So before we move on to the next song, because it kind of transitions well from where we're at. I kind of want to say as well that the experience of Wavetale, it is a short one. I didn't put a lot of hours into this experience, even though when I was done with it, it felt like I've been playing this for a long a lot longer than I actually did.
Mm.
So that is actually something that was very interesting with the game, that it really sucked me in, and it felt like I was spending a lot of time in there, but I
Nice.
didn't.
Yeah.
So that was actually something very interesting, very unique I haven't felt before, in which, in my case, I think Wavetale did amazingly. Because
Wow.
it
Thanks.
also kind of was the bad part about it as well, because it kind of becomes repetitive, because you don't have that much, like, other than the story and the world changing a little bit, is not that much else happening. So
True.
it kind of was like a double edge, but I think they actually really got it like right in the middle there to a good extent.
Yeah. I think that was sort of the aim, to like really focus on the storytelling and the surfing and the flow sort
Mm,
of feeling.
mm,
And the combat is just like, I don't know, an
yeah.
excuse. You have to do something. So you press square to hit
To hit.
things.
And you press another button to start hooking things.
Yeah. But the like wave surfing and just the flowy feeling in general
Mm.
was probably one of the main focuses.
So yeah, with that said, we transition to the second song of this episode, and that one has the simple name of Oceans. Oceans. And yeah, this one is a very neat one. You can really feel the waves on this one, man.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
So this is basically kind of what happens when you kind of transition most of the time in this world, because yeah, you are sliding or moving around on the water in this game. And I kind of don't want to tell you why the reason is, because I kind of want to leave something for the people to play. But everybody knows who looks at the trailer, you will be sliding around and jumping on water a whole lot. Because yeah, just like Wind Waker, everything is covered in water, except small islands.
Exactly. Yeah. The small old mountaintops, probably.
Exactly. But yeah, Oceans is a really neat one as well. I really did enjoy Oceans. I think this is the track that I kind of remember the most. But that was due to the fact that you transitioned so much back and forth between these islands. And Oceans felt like the one that I kind of resonated with the most, but it kind of felt like the best tune to kind of slide around on the water on, considering the full track.
Yeah.
Of course, you have others that we will listen to later that are kind of more towards like the darkness, melancholic type or vibe of the game. So we kind of have that kind of contrast as well. But right now, I kind of want to feel like we want to focus a little bit more on this. So considering your world map that you made and going through like, oh, this track will be here, this these islands that you want to travel to will kind of resonate and sound like this. What made you feel like, hey, this track could be a really good transition between these parts as well, with this mellowness?
Yeah. Well, so Oceans was the first track I wrote for this game.
Oh, okay.
And so
was it easy to write it?
In a way, but also in a way not. This was written pretty early in development, and it was the idea was to they needed like one song to sort of nail like the sort of the vibe or the sound of the game. And after that, I was away from the project for a while, so this was like I had to get this song right.
Okay.
So the idea was to have basically the theme of the ocean, what sounds like when you're surfing around on the ocean. So it wasn't, it was in a way, as you call it, a transition track, but it's also like the transition was like the main focus of the game, sort of traveling the waves. That's like what you do in the game. So we needed something that was both sort of words. It was supposed to evoke both the feeling of the flowy movement of the surfing, obviously, and like the drivey sort of flowy movement surfing the waves, but also with this melancholic tone that we need at all times, because the world is a pretty gloomy place.
Yeah.
So to sort of combine that melancholic friction with flowy movement, which is really hard to do. But this is sort of what I came up with. And the piano in the start is, I'm always really picturing like waves when I play that stuff. It's pretty dynamic and goes up and down, and it's. And I remember the art director talked a lot about that we wanted to capture this dynamic picture of the ocean as both something beautiful and like it can be calm and calming and soothing place, but it can also be I think like extreme force of nature that can be violent and brutal. So we sort of wanted to capture that whole range. And also when you listen to the soundtrack version, it's the same as the Night Orchard song, that it's the first half of the soundtrack version is played when you leave the island and you're heading towards something else. And this second part, which is a more mayor happy mood feeling, is played when you return from places, generally speaking.
So you kind of have after the half of the song, you kind of have the more sense of adventure, like you're on this adventure right now. It's not going to it. You're right there right now with the adventure.
And you sort of have just accomplished something. You've like completed some mission on these remote islands, and you head back home with this feeling of like being the queen of the ocean, and you just sort of enjoy surfing.
It's like you're an Australian person, a surfer dude or surfer girl in this sense.
In a way, but also always in this melancholic sort of setting with everything is always two-sided.
But considering the soundtrack here as well, one thing we're noticing quite quickly is the tracks of the soundtrack. They're actually really long. We have 15 tracks, and I would say a majority of these songs are like at least 4.5 minutes plus. How come you chose to go with such a wide variety of length in the tracks themselves?
Well, the interesting thing here is that the soundtrack version is very different from the game version. We use this engine Elias that we talked about. That is for those who don't know, a third-party music playback software, you could call it, that enables you to do adaptive dynamic music, depending on various game parameters or triggers. So the songs in the game is very rarely like a loop from beginning to end. It's more like lots of different parts and instruments and intensity levels that triggers and loops and makes music as you go. So for the soundtrack, there was a lot of work to put together songs that had a beginning and an end. So the soundtrack, as it appears on as an album, is very much like sort of a construction of how it could sound when you play the game. And some of the songs are really long just because there are so many ways that the song can play in the game, and trying to make something that represents that in a way.
And in consideration to having more of a adaptive kind of approach to video game music, I guess it kind of changes like how you think as a composer as well. How do you feel on your end, composing wise? How have it changed for you when you're working more with adaptive music rather than just, hey, let's make a soundtrack?
Yeah, I get you. That was actually a really tricky part, and I spend a lot of time being stuck in that. Like, how am I supposed to write this song? Everything is like 4-dimensional at all times.
Yeah.
And I think I most often retreated to the actually composing was like as if it would be just a normal song. And then in a later stage of production, I would start to tear it apart, and like this could go here and this could go here, and do these more complex, because it was so difficult to. When it gets like technical, it's very hard to also be like artistically creative. So I tried to just do that first. Like, okay, now I have a song and or like an idea, and there's melody and chords, and that is. We know that conveys like the feelings we need it to, and then there's a technical aspect, or more technical. It's also creative, but in another way, to make it work with all the different situations you could be in and the variations that we need.
You might correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm getting more of a visual approach here when you're talking about this, and I kind of have my own kind of vibe on how like this dynamic music or adaptive music kind of work. I usually tend to see like, hey, let's look at a house made of Legos, and you start dissecting it as much as possible, and until you get like, okay, this is the minimum amount of bricks I need in order to make it still look and feel like a house. That kind of is how adaptive music kind of is as well, because you can have the least amount of bricks for this house, but you still say, oh, this is a house. And then as you add more and more different visuals or things to this, you feel like, oh, this is a real house. Just like you feel like, oh, this is a real track. So it feels like from a creative aspect of it, it feels like sometimes you create like a full tune. It's like, this is what I want the house or the sound to sound like when you're playing. But then you start dissecting. It's like, how much can I actually adapt this to see how is it still a track?
Oh yeah, I hear you. Yeah, there was a lot of that, and there's also like creative and sort of productive aspect of doing that, because sometimes when you like deconstruct it enough and you take away the bass, sort of not like the instrument, but and you just leave like some strange parts that was only up in the background, but when everything else is gone, and because in some areas that's all you hear, like if you're in the outskirts of the area, the sort of main parts fade away and there's only these, and like, wow, this sounds really nice. And I would never consider like doing just those parts if it weren't for like, because in the engine it's easy to just mute stuff, and like what happens if we take away everything that's the actual song and just keep these background stuff? So there's like a lot of material that like in the sort of volume of the song, not like as sound volume, but the the mass becomes larger when you can take it apart and
Yeah.
play all these different parts in different combinations.
And considering the different instruments you kind of use for this soundtrack as well, we can hear a lot of different instruments coming back, making this kind of spectrum of music that kind of, I would say, is trademark now for Wavetale. Was there anything in the soundtrack when you're working adaptively with it that you felt like, okay, when I took this away, it kind of lost its identity
Interesting.
while working?
I mean, I think the flugelhorn, it's basically flugelhorn, flute, marimba, and some strings, and piano, and some other stuff. But I think those wind instruments is really important for the identity, I think. That's probably, I mean, there it feels to me like the marimba, flute, and flugelhorn, and this also, I mean, I'm using pretty much the same sounds in all songs. It's a pretty well defined palette, sort of, and it felt towards the end that it had come to a point that even if I take away some of these for some songs, all the parts had become such like intertwined parts of the whole that it sort of makes sense anyway. It's like all of the pieces still sort of convey Wavetale.
Yeah.
In a way, I think.
That's nice. That is nice to hear. So with that said, I think we kind of want to transcend to the next one. And this one, with the next track, we're basically going to go in between the fog. Because that's the soundtrack's name. Or not the sound, but the song's name. Yeah, the track's name. Of course, with Oceans, we're still close to the fog and everything, but now we're getting a little bit more intense here. So let's listen and enjoy to the track of Between the Fog. There we fade out the tones of Between the Fog. And this one is a little bit special as well. Of course, right now we're moving a little bit more in between the fog. The fog kind of comes in closer to us. So it becomes a little bit more intense in the world of Wavetale. From this colorful palette that we usually have, it becomes a little bit darker now. And I kind of feel, listening to this now, more separate of the experience. I can feel that it is also, considering the rest of the soundtrack, it feels way more intense as well. But I think that's mostly because, like we talked about in the beginning of the episode, we have this melancholy surrounding this. But for some reason, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Donkey Kong and especially... Yeah, and you have the Sticker Bush Symphony. Because you kind of have this wind instrument and you kind of have this intense kind of vibe, especially like in the second half of this song, which we didn't listen to today, but for people that listen to the soundtrack on Spotify and so on, or play the game, will hear this part as well. Specifically, people will hear it in the background now as well, most likely.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I kind of like that vibe, having more the intenseness going, and it kind of gives me, just like Stickerbush Symphony, it kind of has this edge to it that kind of pressures you. So I really enjoy this track.
Yeah, cool. That's really interesting to hear. Yeah, because when you mentioned Donkey Kong, I was first like, what? But then like, yeah, I really hear you. Didn't think about that. Well, yeah. So this was the intention here was really to express that sort of pressure, that this gloom or fog getting closer and around you. And so it's the main like flute riff sort of ostinato thing that you hear at the beginning, and that's going over. It's a weird, very like music theoretically it's pretty weird. It's like a 5 against 4 double. It's a very like strange and it's very difficult to dance to. You don't know like where the beat is. And then there's this pretty heavy busy synths that also doesn't play the first beat of the bar, which makes it even more confusing. But that was sort of the idea, to have it should be like groovy and but there's no actual drums. There's just some synthy percussion and lots of rhythms going on in the flutes and various instruments, and then there's the trombones keeping the brass thing alive too.
So considering the when you worked on this project as well, how much was the feedback back and forth between you as a composer and the developers of this game as well?
Depending, it was. I mean, I've been working with Design Games for quite a while, and this is like my 5th project with them, maybe. So we've sort of started developing a relationship where I have pretty free hands to.
How does that make you as a composer feel as well? Are you feeling more comfortable in that type of role where you have this more like trust from the developers, or do you feel like you might kind of, even though you don't, because I guess you don't, you don't get too relaxed with the composing part as well because they have so much trust in you? Because usually when you talk about working in the same place for a longer period of time, people usually tend to get a little bit relaxed on their workspace and so on. How does it feel as a composer from that part?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different from being, since I'm not an employee and I'm freelancing, and there's usually quite a lot of time in between the projects. It always feels like new every time, and there's a lot of new people. But I feel pretty confident in a way, and also I feel that I trust our communication. I think that I've been working with, because the same art director that I've been working with, Andreas Beyer, for lots of projects. And I know that when we talk about what we want to do, I will understand what he means, which is not always the case.
Yes, because I know from talking with multiple composers that communication can be the hardest thing about this, especially as the composer, because from some points maybe the people who want the composer to do something might not, just like me, don't have anything. Like when it comes to music, I don't know anything. I can't play any instruments or so on.
Yeah, that's all very often very difficult to like find a common language sort of. But it's since that relationship has been going for a couple of years now, I feel pretty confident in that I will be able to find what they want. So it's not been that much like feedback. It has been a couple of back and forths, but it's also been more like talking about, as I mentioned earlier, talking about like the core ideas and what we want to do. And I feel pretty confident that I can find that sort of. But it's been a few songs has been a lot of back and forth thing. Also because you really know what you want in the beginning of a project, because the game doesn't exist yet.
Exactly. It's not the easiest to know what you want when you don't have anything.
Yeah.
But considering the word phrasing here of you don't know what you have yet and so on, you kind of joined in quite early on this project, right?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Because usually we tend to see more composers joining in later in a project.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you've been there as well, joining later in a project as well. How does it feel to be earlier on a project working on the music part?
I mean, it can be both good and bad, I suppose. I really enjoy it in a way because I can be. Oh, sorry,
What is the best? What is the best thing to be early on a project? If we state it like that, what's the best take on being early on a project?
I mean, you get to be you sort of feel that you're part of the team and the project, and that you can. Some of the decisions you make can be stuff that, like if you make like one of these, the Oceans was a song that was in the game from pretty early. That sort of also affects the development in a way, so it's more of a back and forth thing in that sense. It's not only that I put my work on top of theirs, it's more of a collaboration, I think, and I get to be a bigger part of the game's identity in a way, I suppose. But then the worst part is obviously that you don't know what you're doing, and there's a lot of guessing. And usually, like when the game is done and it's actually a good time for me to get in and do my part, it's way too late. Then the game is shipping in a few weeks and you have to be done. So there's a lot of just trying to understand what the plan is and doing a lot of guesswork and preparation, so that when the ground is actually laid, so you can start working for sure. Then you have a lot of things to go, and that you don't start from scratch at that point, because there will be no chance that I would make it in time. But that's also a pretty messy situation to be in, to like just have like vague descriptions of the idea of a world and try to write something that will match with the end product.
Try to give something an identity when it doesn't really have a form yet.
yeah, that's a very good phrasing. Yeah, that's exactly what I do.
But I guess from your perspective, I mean, as a very creative soul, do you feel like it is really hard to give a sense of identity to something that doesn't really have any form yet, or is that just part of your creativeness? It's like, hey, I am the one giving the form to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's not only me, but
of course.
But I mean, I'm pretty confident in working with abstract ideas. That's sort of what music is in a way. So I don't think that is the hard part. Is making sure that it fits the final result, because so much always changes. Also, when you go around, there's a few songs in this soundtrack, like the Sleepy Triplets Town, for example. That was sort of more the direction, or my idea was to have that would be more of a like Zelda-like village where you walk around and talk to people, and that was sort of what I was composing towards. But then in the end project, you don't really do that. You just run around and swish past, and it's not really that kind of a slow tempo. So it's a bit of a weird match, to be honest. So there's a few cases where, like, if I would have looked at the final game and sort of composed to that, I would have made a few other decisions.
Okay.
I don't remember the question, but that.
No, that answered the question perfectly, in my opinion, I would say.
Nice.
So with that said, I think we're about to head into the last track of the week here. So and with that, we're going to visit one of the returning enemies of the game without spoiling too much. We can also see this creature in the front of the art of. It's not much of a box art nowadays, but the store art, I would say.
Yeah.
Also the main screen of this. So we're going to listen to the track "The Serpent." Now this was a freaking track. Holy crap! This is I don't even know where to start really to begin with. First of all, this is the serpent. This is one of the enemies within the game that you will meet in the game, and this is kind of a mysterious one because you don't really know much about it, and the more you every time you're meeting, you're getting something new from it. So it's very interesting in that sense of what happened and how it kind of works. And when it comes to the music, you still have the sense where you're driving around on the water. I won't say driving, you're sliding around on the water. And this giant serpent is just spewing gloom and spewing out enemies and so on that you need to fight and so on. And you could kind of hear this, but I kind of sense the feeling like usually when you listen to boss fights or you listen to like action music that we talked about earlier in the podcast about, I had a sense of more of a techno vibe almost on this.
Yeah.
And I really do enjoy it. It really felt well while you meet the serpent. I really do enjoy that kind of feeling, that sense of action, because I would say it was just about right, because it's not super hectic or anything. But the music kind of have a contrast to that of making it a little bit more actiony than it actually is. And I don't know what you felt about it when you were working on it, but that is my sense as a customer playing the game.
Interesting.
So what was your sense or your take when you worked on this track?
Yeah, I mean, this is like, in a way, a sort of classic boss music, but that's at least what you'd expect, sort of. And it needs to have this sense of urgency and drive and action feeling, but I sort of want to have some sort of elegance to it as well, I suppose. So it's in a odd 7/8 time signature, which doesn't make sense if you don't speak music, but it's like an uneven rhythm that sort of puts you off. It's a bit more unpredictable, maybe, in like on a micro level, sort of. Lots of synths.
Composers out there is like, oh yeah. Everybody else, what the hell?
Yeah, probably. And composers are like, what the hell, too, because I'm just mumbling.
Like he's crazy.
Yeah, but it's and there's a lot of synths, and synths sort of. I mean, it's in a way it's a cliche, but they like represent the technical, dangerous technical aspects. These machines gone wrong, and as a contrast to like the nature and the ocean and organic stuff. But it's sort of makes sense. There's lots of synths, but also a lot of organic instruments as well.
Yeah. I guess we're not hearing any flugelhorn in this one. It sounds way deeper, the brass horn that I guess is in this one.
Yeah, there's a bass clarinet in the beginning. Actually, the flugelhorn is here as well, playing a melody towards the end-ish. Or a bit over 3 minutes, I think, kicks in. But the bass thing is a bass clarinet. There's probably there's some trombones as well, and very low piano. Hits.
So what made you feel like, hey, we need a more actiony vibe and everything? Techno is the way to go.
Techno is the way to go. I to be honest, I think boss music is really difficult.
Would you say for you as a composer, is that one of the hardest things to work for you?
Yeah, I think so. Those more like melody focused things comes much easier to me, and there's so much convention as well in like games in general of like how a boss music should sound and how a boss fight should feel. So you have to have this really pushy, drivey feel. I suppose. I think so here as well, because as you said, the serpent is very, very huge and it's moving kind of slowly.
So it kind of gives you a vibe of Shadow of the Colossus with all the Colossus you're climbing on and so on.
Yeah. for sure. So the music sort of has to reflect like your nerves as the player rather than the enemies. So lots of like fast synth arpeggios and lots of movement, this obviously also in game is pretty adaptive, and the first the music escalates dynamically as you progress through the boss fight. And the soundtrack version is like how it could sound if you play it on exactly 5 minutes.
Considering like the track of the serpent, there are multiple times, as I said, that you meet this creature. Is the track adaptive in different ways depending on which time you're meeting him or the serpent?
Yep.
Okay.
The first time, it doesn't use all of it goes like one step further the second time. And it's there's been so many years since I actually did this. I think it's actually 2 different songs in the game. But it's the same like theme, but it's a bit differently put.
Same but different, like we usually say.
Yes.
In mortal tongue.
Yeah, that's the way. So yeah, it's more music the second time around. Yeah.
Okay. That's nice. No, I really enjoy overall the soundtrack and everything. I would say this soundtrack for me is so much better when I'm playing it together with the game. But it's still a very mellow overall soundtrack. Usually that's not the music I listen to, but I really did enjoy it. So that's something you should really be proud of, in my opinion, when it comes to this soundtrack. And the reason why I started talking about this is kind of now I'm trying to collect everything and talk more plainly in general about the Wavetale. So considering all the work you put down into this, of course I know you're super proud of all the work, but is there any of these tracks that kind of resonates better with you, that you feel like, oh, I really nailed this one?
It could be the Oceans track, maybe, or maybe the last track, Iris Lullaby, which was also a collaboration with Alexandra, who was narrative lead and wrote the script, and also Mackenzie Atwood singing. And that's the same melody that's also heard in the Night Orchard and a couple of other places. I think that melody feels very honest. And
have you done much vocal tracks before?
No, very little.
How was it to work with a more vocal track then for you? Was it any difference, or?
I mean, I didn't originally wrote it as a vocal track. I think I wrote it on the piano, and then we saw, this could actually work as a lullaby. That they wanted a lullaby from. They like requested a lullaby, and I have this idea. Could that work? And a fun thing about that is that the game is voiced in 5 languages. And since this track is also sung like in the game, it's also localized to 5 different languages. So I have like a project on my computer with this song in 5 different languages simultaneously.
That's cool.
It's very rare that you have a song in different languages to play back in the same time. It sounds absolutely
which do you remember which languages they're in? And did you have any, like, this one was really like surprisingly good for you?
I think it's English, French, Italian, Spanish, and something else. Some of them took a lot of auto-tune because the voice actors was just asked, "Can you sing?" And I was like, "Yeah," and then I was like, "I don't know." Some of them was Mackenzie.
Like,
was amazing.
People can sing, but some should sing by themselves.
I won't say who, but some of the languages took a bit of post editing too.
I would say everybody can sing. It's just a matter of who likes what. Of course, it's hard for everybody to love everything, but of course we can like really appreciate the work people do.
Yeah.
I mean, myself, I don't consider myself a singer, but I really love karaoke, and it's really fun to just do that. And of course, I can see people not liking when I'm singing. But I mean, it's all for the fun.
Like about, that's not about performance. It's just about fun. And in that sense, I agree. Everybody can sing. I'm a terrible singer. I have a good ear to hear how out of pitch I am, but I have no way to. I have
correct yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. But yeah, I think that kind of is it for the talk about your work on Wavetale. It was super fun to talk about it, get to know you a little bit better, even a little bit better more than the first time I interviewed you and the times I've met you. But it's always fun to talk to you, Joel.
The same to you.
So considering this, we're packing up with the Wavetale and everything. Is there anything else you want to kind of talk about at the moment, or do you wish just to share a little bit where people can maybe follow you and get to know you a little bit better, or even maybe talk to you a little bit about composition?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I feel that we've talked about a lot of things. It's really, I like that with this this podcast, that it feels like it goes so deep when we talk about specific songs and you get really specific, and that's really nice. But if you want to talk more with me, I'm on Twitter. You will probably put a link somewhere, I suppose.
Yes, I will definitely have a link to everything where people can buy the soundtrack, where people can listen to the soundtrack, and even to your composer interview from Thunderful Games as well, and together with all the other links that you want me to provide. That will be found at videospelsklubben.se and the main post.
Nice. But yeah, if you have any questions, you want to talk, reach out on Twitter or email or wherever you find me.
Awesome. And yeah, as a little bit of a thank you from you as well for being part of this podcast, you also sponsored with the soundtrack. So we will basically, to one of my Patreons, share a link so they can download the soundtrack over at Bandcamp as well.
Yes.
Which is super sweet of you to do. So it is great. We're supporting you by utilizing the podcast so you can talk more about the music, people can get to know you. I've already purchased the soundtrack, and I hope a lot of other people will do that too. And that's kind of what I want to do with the podcast as well. We need to share, we need to care, and we need to support the composers that we all love. And I hope a lot of my listeners have found some more love for you and your music and want to start looking into more of the soundtracks that you've been working on.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, I
very
hope
much
so.
Appreciated.
Yeah, and I highly recommend to listen to the other work you've done, especially the work you did on Fee as well. It was super fun to both talk about it, but also play and listen to the soundtrack.
Thank you.
So yeah, do you have any other final words before I go with the last thing?
I think I'm good.
You think you're good? Okay, awesome. Yeah. So, for everybody who's been listening to this podcast, other episodes of the podcast of Gameable Audio, you'll find that on our homepage, videospelsklubben.se, Spotify, or in your closest podcast app. I think I have every podcast covered. If you have a podcast app and it's not there, please link me. Send me whatever it is. Feel free to follow and give comments on one of our social medias, or even both. That would be super fun. It's either on Facebook or on Instagram. Just search for Gameable Audio. And you can also support this podcast for future content, quality upgrades, but also in the end, future composers by becoming a Patreon member. And of course, if you would like to have a chance to get the soundtrack that we've just been listening to and you want it, then definitely think about becoming a patron. So our current awesome Patreon backers that we have today is Daniel Lunemark, Lars Schenström, and Titti Schenström. So yeah, all the links of where you can either buy or support Joel, you will find those in our main post at videospelsklubben.se. And with that said, the next theme we will have for our podcast will be on the theme of generational superstars. So to explain the thematic a little bit, I'm basically going to talk a little bit more about the generation of different consoles and pick some of the superstars that we basically have on this. So Joel, do you have any like suggestion or anything that you feel like, hey, this is a generational superstar from any generation, basically?
Oh, like a song or a game or
song.
Generation. I mean, is GameCube
Well, if you have a
getting retro
soundtrack,
yet?
I mean, it's still a generational console, so I mean, it doesn't need to be retro per se. So go ahead.
I mean, anything from Wind Waker is really outstanding. But let's go for the Ocean's theme from Wind Waker then.
The Ocean's theme from the Wind Waker. Yeah, that one is. I know a lot of people love that one, and now when I'm playing Wind Waker myself for the first time, don't hate me.
Oh wow!
I know a lot of people's like, "What? You haven't played Wind Waker yet?"
Yeah.
And the more I play 3D Zelda games, the more I kind of get to know myself not liking 3D Zelda games. I don't know what's wrong with me.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm having a hard time with it, but I love the music. That I can definitely sign up on. The music for Wind Waker is amazing.
Yeah.
And the Ocean theme is... Yeah, please go.
No, but I agree. Maybe it's one of those games that worked better back in the days when you had the patience to just sit there, and because there's a lot of just sailing.
Traveling, yeah.
A lot of traveling.
But
the music is amazing, so it sort of feels okay.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure I'd have the patience if I'd played it for the first time now.
For me, I mean, definitely when it comes to Wind Waker, one of my favorite themes is also one of the first themes you get in the game. Not the first island, but the second island, the Dragon Roost.
Oh yes, that's an amazing track. Really
that one is a really favorite of mine, and I love all the different remixes of the soundtrack of that one and so on. So it's a lot of different music out there, and I just love the spectrum of it.
Me too.
But yeah, I think that is it for the episode. So Joel, thank you so much for being part of this podcast episode and making it very freaking magical.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So with that said, everybody do take care, and I hope you will all return for the next episode in 2 weeks. Take care, everybody, and see you all guys next time.
Goodbye, everybody.